You can see on the map how flights are avoiding that particular area, like a dead zone, quite aptly named, because this place single-handedly killed a lot more Allied aircrews during World War II than the Germans killed in the Battle of Britain through bombing. In some months, almost 50% of all Allied planes that flew over Tibet ended up crashing. But why? What's the mystery of this place? Why are we, mankind, flying rockets to space but unable to fly over Tibet? The Tibetan Plateau is like a vast and empty landscape, about 5 times larger than France, but home to 11 times fewer people. This region, located in southwest China, borders India to the west, Nepal to the southwest, and Burma and Bhutan to the southeast. Tibet basically rests on the Tibetan Plateau, the world's largest and highest plateau, covering around 2.5 million square kilometers. Most of it lies between 13,000 and 5,000 feet above sea level. Honestly, people gave it the nickname Roof of the World. Tibet is also guarded by the world's 2 highest peaks, Mount Everest at 8,849 meters and Mount Godwin-Austen, or K2, at 8,611 meters. Now, as our geography lecture is over, and you also got an idea of the place, let's come back to our point. Once upon a time, Tibet was not a no-fly zone. During World War II, the flights of the Allied forces used to fly over Tibet. British India was also a part of the Allies. They helped to transport supplies into China to support the war against Japan, so they used this air corridor frequently. After the Japanese cut off the Burma Road, the Allied pilots navigated cargo flights from India and Burma through Tibet to reach China. But this killer route felt like flying the hump, as most of the flights started crashing before reaching China. The route from eastern India to Kunming, China stretched over 840 kilometers. Flying over the Tibetan Plateau presented severe challenges. Intense turbulence, wind speeds up to 200 miles per hour, freezing temperatures that threatened fuel, unpredictable weather, and limited emergency landing options. Occasionally, Japanese fighters added to the danger. To your surprise, over 42 months, 594 planes and 1,659 crew members were lost in these dangerous conditions, mostly due to natural hazards rather than enemy attacks. Since then, the Tibetan Plateau has gradually opened up. The first Tibetan airport opened in 1956 in Lhasa. Today, there are a total of 5 airports in Tibet: Lhasa Gongar Airport, Nyingchi Mainling Airport, Chamdo Bangda Airport, Shigatse Peach Airport, and Angari Gunsa Airport. But apart from Lhasa, other airports are significantly smaller, typically handling few to no domestic flights daily. So, if we talk about major international airports on the plateau, there are only 2, Lhasa and Xining. These airports primarily serve domestic flights connecting with the rest of China, though Lhasa does have a single international route to Kathmandu, and Xining connects with Taipei, Tokyo, and Kuala Lumpur. Despite these advancements, most international flights between Eastern Asia and the West still keep away from the Tibetan Plateau. This cautious approach stems from various factors, notably the challenges posed by the plateau's high altitude. Despite its strategic importance during wartime, the Tibetan Plateau remains a remote and rarely traveled airspace. Its high altitude and tough conditions make it one of the most difficult places for flying in the world. Lhasa's airport is located at a very high altitude, at 11,800 feet elevation. This means people arriving there need to adjust slowly to the altitude. If that's a major problem, another good reason airlines avoid flying over the Tibetan Plateau is the immense risk during emergencies. Let's understand very simple math here. The plateau's average elevation is 14,800 feet, while airliners typically cruise at altitudes above 30,000 feet. Normally, this height difference isn't an issue. However, in critical situations like cabin depressurization or engine failure, planes have to go downward to 10,000 feet, according to standard protocol, where passengers can breathe normally without supplemental oxygen. In a cabin depressurization scenario, oxygen masks are used, providing a limited supply, usually around 20 minutes, for passengers until the plane reaches safer altitudes. But over the vast Tibetan Plateau, descending to 10,000 feet isn't possible. because the plateau itself is high above 10,000 feet. So, trying to descend to 10,000 feet means a plane has to crash land dangerously into mountains, killing everyone on board instantly. In 2018, a Sichuan Airlines flight from Chongqing to Lhasa experienced a severe depressurization incident when a window blew out over the Tibetan plateau at 30,000 feet. Luckily, the pilots were near the plateau's edge, and like a plot twist that changed the fate of 128 people that day. The flight managed to swiftly turn back, landing safely at Chengdu Airport just 35 minutes after the incident. If the emergency had happened farther into the plateau, it could have been much more dangerous because there were no nearby airports where the plane could safely land, which would have meant passengers would go longer without enough oxygen. If any day such an emergency happens in Tibet, the closest major international airports capable of handling large airliners are located hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. These include Lhasa, Xining, Kathmandu, Chengdu, Urumqi, and Almaty, located around the plateau's edges. For example, on a flight from Kathmandu to Lhasa, both cities serve not just as destinations, but also as emergency landing sites due to their closeness and safety. Naturally, this clearly explains why airlines avoid flying over Tibet, but that's not all. Apart from all those, two more factors prevent planes from flying over Tibet: severe turbulence and the risk of jet fuel freezing at the high altitudes typical of the plateau. Turbulence on flights happens when the air currents become unstable due to factors like the sun's heat, weather, and especially mountains. When strong wind blows over mountains, it can cause wavy patterns in the air. On the Tibetan plateau, where strong winds meet rugged mountains, these patterns often form triangle-shaped waves. Flying through this turbulent air feels exactly like riding a bike in full speed in third gear over a speed breaker. It's not only uncomfortable for passengers, but also extremely dangerous, both for bikes and planes. While turbulence is common on any flight, it's more frequent and unpredictable in high-altitude mountainous regions like Tibet. This unpredictability not only disturbs passengers, but also complicates emergency responses for flight crews. On top of that, there's another critical concern related to Tibet's mountainous terrain, which is the risk of jet fuel freezing. Let me tell you what happened to British Airways Flight 38 due to fuel freezing. In 2008, British Airways Flight 38 crash-landed at London Heathrow due to ice crystals forming in the fuel, which clogged the engines and caused the plane to crash short of the runway. Fortunately, there were no fatalities, but this accident made the aviation system more careful about the critical role of temperature in maintaining jet fuel flow. Naturally, at high elevations like the Tibet Plateau, temperatures are significantly lower compared to lower altitudes. Jet A1 fuel, widely used in commercial aviation, has a freezing point of -47 degrees Celsius. Jet A, more common in the US, freezes at a slightly higher temperature of -40 degrees Celsius. So, these fuels can potentially freeze under extreme conditions. The extreme cold can be risky for planes flying there. The weather and altitude change quickly, making it hard to manage fuel temperatures. Keeping the fuel liquid and usable is crucial for safe and efficient flights in Tibet. Such low temperatures are not regularly sustained for long periods, but at high altitudes over already cold mountains, the risk increases. While it may not seem significant for shorter flights in or out of the region, a prolonged flight over Tibet could pose serious challenges. In addition to that, there is also a smaller population in this area. The Tibet Autonomous Region, spanning nearly a quarter of China's landmass, is home to just over 7 million people, occupying a mere 0.54% of China's total population. Naturally, a smaller population has less demand for both long-haul international flights between Europe and Asia and shorter domestic flights. So, contrary to local beliefs, the primary reason airplanes tend to avoid flying over the Tibetan Plateau en route to their destinations isn't due to any supernatural phenomena, but rather a practical reality. What do you say? Do you still think there's some spiritual play behind this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay tuned for more fascinating insights. For example, Tibet is not the only place that the flights avoid. Antarctica is also another one, especially a much larger one. Click on this video if you want to know why.